Now, today, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in a case that will force them to decide whether corporations can be held liable for human rights abuses or if they get to maintain their corporate immunity. It's especially testing considering if the Supreme Court 2 years ago ruled that corporations were legal persons entitled to free speech in elections. Now, the particular case today is that of Liable versus Royal Dutch Petroleum. Also, you may notice Shell. So the case is brought by 12 Nigerian plaintiffs that accuse Shell of assisting or collaborating with the Nigerian government in torture, summary execution, and other crimes against humanity that were carried out against the Ogoni people in the Niger Delta. So it's all based on this law dating back to 1789, the Alien Tort Statute, which has seen a reawakening, you could say, in the last 20 years. Now, while the court won't rule until June, how much should we read into the statements and the questions made by the justices today? And what kind of ramifications will their decision have for international law, American law, and the idea of corporate responsibility? Here to discuss this with me is Mike Sachs, Supreme Court correspondent for the Huffington Post. Mike, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Happy to be here.
I mean, what do you say about the timing? I would say that it's kind of perfect, right? Because suddenly in the national popular discourse, we hear so much about corporate personhood, about corporate responsibility.
Right. This case gives the court an opportunity to show whether it has a real tin ear or not to the public opinion. When it's faced with the question of whether corporations can be held responsible for international human rights abuses, the question of corporate personhood comes in. Are corporations natural persons or artificial persons? We know they're artificial persons, despite what Mitt Romney tells us.
But they're rich persons.
But, well, yes, they are rich persons. But the question in this case is whether there's a difference between natural and legal persons when it comes to this statute you cited before, and whether or not corporations can be defendants.
Give us a little background on that.
Yeah.
Tell us more about this Alien Tort Statute.
So the Alien Tort Statute was passed by the founding, framing government, the first Congress, in 1789. And one of the reasons it was passed was to, say, protect ambassadors from being assaulted, to make sure that pirates didn't go running rampant on the high seas. Now, in about 2004, the Supreme Court ruled that certain torts, certain wrongs that are done, like genocide, torture, crimes against humanity, can be heard by federal courts in the United States that are brought by foreign nationals. So the question today became, who can be sued? We know the kind of cases that can come under. We know that the torture claims that Liable and the other Nigerians brought against Shell can be heard by foreign or federal courts. The question now is, which the Alien Tort Statute leaves completely unanswered, is whether corporations can be sued or whether it's only the individuals who can be sued.
The individuals. Now, what I find kind of interesting here, too, is the way that you see the teams lining up, right? Is that, of course, supporting Shell on their side, you have other corporations, you have the Chamber of Commerce, you also have the British and the German government, and then, you know, on the side of, you could say, the plaintiffs, you obviously have human rights groups, and then you have the U.S. government. So how do you see that differentiation between where the U.S. lies and where the U.K. lies?
It's kind of a partisan lineup. The four courts to have considered this case in the last year have held 3-1 that the corporations can be held liable under this statute. But in each of those cases, the Republican appointees and the Democratic appointees split on partisan lines, save one judge on each side. And the Democratic appointees ruled for corporate immunity, or corporate liability rather. The Republican appointees ruled for corporate immunity. Now, at the Supreme Court today, in oral arguments, it became quite apparent right from the start.
Same thing.
Same thing. And there wasn't going to be one exception on each side, as there was in the lower courts. In this case, from Justice Kennedy all the way across, assuming Clarence Thomas, who's maintained a 6-year silence on the bench now in oral arguments, rules with his conservative brethren, as he has most likely in his entire career on the court, it's looking like it's going to be a 5-4 case for corporate immunity.
So you're already making the prediction now, right, that it's going to go in the way towards Shell. You know, one of the things that I think is pretty interesting, and I think Justice Breyer brought this up today too, is that do we want to have this Supreme Court for the world? Should we even have such a statute where if something happens in another country, it gets to come to our courts and we have a say on it? But, you know, do you think that that's something that should be debated, deliberated at some point? It's just here they're being obvious hypocrites because they're okay with it applying to individuals, just not sure if it goes for companies? Well,
it should be debated, really. And there is an open question of whether or not there should be universal jurisdiction in United States federal courts. And that's what the governments of the United Kingdom and Netherlands and Germany all submitted briefs on the side of the corporation saying as much. You know, they think that the multinational courts, the ICC and the courts that are set up under international law, are competent to handle these kinds of questions. And it's not the United States' business to be messing its nose in foreign relations in this way. So in that sense, that's a legitimate question. And that does give the conservatives on the court some cover if they want to just be naked in their policymaking on why they're choosing what they're choosing. Because really, the legal arguments for each side, they don't cross paths. They don't come from the same fountain. The legal arguments for each side were made up in the lower courts to justify the ends that the partisan interests were pushing.
Do you think that it's interesting? I mean, I guess maybe you could say that it's a little obvious, too, that, let's say, the U.S. government, the Obama administration, is on the side of the plaintiffs in this case. But when it came to certain people trying to sue Boeing, right, other private corporations that happened to ferry them over to other countries, in cases of rendition where they were then tortured, the Supreme Court decided to stay out of it because they said, well, state secrets we can't rule.
Well, yes, on the surface, that is a bit of hypocrisy. But again, when you get down to the law, there is a distinction between this case, the Alien Tort Statute case, and Citizens United in holding corporate personhood for First Amendment rights. So if you're parsing the law, then these things all have their reasons. But when you zoom out and you look at it as an observer, as you do and as I still try to do, despite being a reporter for the court, you do start seeing a general amount of hypocrisy when you look at the court and how it handles business interests.
So what do you think the ramifications will be? We see a lot of public anger here within the U.S. right now that's critical of the Citizens United ruling. At the same time, what is this going to mean on a global scale, right? Now that we have a globalized economy, then what does that mean? Do businesses just get free rein to do whatever they want, work with whatever governments they want?
Well, hopefully not. And what this case does leave open is the possibility for plaintiffs to sue corporate officers to get to individuals, because individual liability is not in question under the Alien Tort Statute. But there's a couple cases coming down the pike where the Supreme Court may actually even more narrow the Alien Tort Statute jurisdiction to the point where there will just be no possibility for plaintiffs to come in and sue even corporate officers for their foreign international human rights violations.
All right, we'll make sure to take a look at those. Mike, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Happy to be here.